Hello and welcome to live product demo of the Veeam Data Platform. Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. While Ton is presenting later on today, Michael is also in the background from Veeam, and he'll be answering some of your questions in the Q&A session. And then at the end, we will have a live audio Q&A as well with some of the broadest, most applicable questions that we can get into there toward the end. So put those questions in the Q&A panel, as you have them. Some of them will be answered maybe right away. Some of them we'll get to at the end. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh is going to fix most audio or video or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you're going to find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to 3 links. There's one to learn more about Veeam Backup and Replication version 12. There's a blog with 12 more reasons Veeam keeps your business running. And there's a copy of Veeam's 2023 Data Protection Trends Report. All great resources. I encourage you to access those now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, at the end of the webinar, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of an event like this is the opportunity to ask a question of the experts on the call. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So at the end of the event, we'll look back at all the questions that came through, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner afterward. And with that, let's get on to today's fantastic content. So it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Ton Nguyen, who's a Principal Systems Engineer at Veeam. Let me bring Ton into the event. Ton, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate and glad to be here today. Absolutely.
Well, I know you've got a lot to get through, with a lot of demos to show us. So looking forward to it. I'll just back out of here and I'll be back on for the Q&A.
Thank you, Scott. So first off, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those that are joining us wherever you are. Appreciate the opportunity and time to have this demo and session with everybody. So today, before we start, let me first and foremost just introduce myself. So my name is Ton Nguyen again. I am a Principal SE. I've been with Veeam for about 8 years. So a lot of the technology we're going over today, some of it's going to be a little bit on the architecture, how Veeam works, the components within Veeam. We're going to talk through some of the integration points that we have with the technology. But I think what most people are here really excited about is version 12 and the different features and functionality that got released in version 12. Now, for those that don't know, we released that version 12 on February 14th, so Valentine's Day, 2 days ago. And I guess that's our way of showing the love to all of our customers out there. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. And with that, again, this is a live demonstration. So we're going to be walking through effectively the product and everything else. If you have any questions, if anything comes up during the presentation, feel free to put it into the question section. Michael, who is another SE working here with me at Veeam, one of my colleagues, he'll be helped to address some of those questions. And if for any reason we can't address them, or we like to just have the broader audience hear the questions so we can address it to everybody, we'll do that at the end also. So with this, what you see on my screen right now is essentially my console screen. So Veeam, again, is comprised of essentially 3 components. Where I'm logged into now is our backup server. So Veeam is comprised of a backup server, we call it proxy server, and a repository. The proxy is like data mover, and the repository is where you store data. The backup server itself will have something like this, a console loaded on it. Now, the nice thing about the console is that, again, the backup server will have a copy of the console, but you could effectively load this console essentially on your laptop, anywhere you want to essentially manage your Veeam backup infrastructure. So connect into the Veeam console. You basically type in your server name. You go ahead and put it in your credentials. Again, this is Active Directory integrated, so it will authenticate you and then allow you access into this console. Now, one of the nice features that came out in version 12 was that for many of our customers, they use multi-factor authentication on their operating system. So they're with Active Directory, they'll use either Dual or Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, well, whatever the case may be. So what Veeam did was Veeam added the functionality in version 12 to essentially allow you to enable multi-factor authentication. And to do so, you would just essentially create a user. Again, this is specifically for just the users, give them a role. And then once you do that, you just check the box here. And then this would require effectively multi-factor authentication on essentially any user login that goes into the console. This is great. One of the things that Veeam talks about a lot is we have 3 pillars. These 3 pillars, one of those pillars is data security. And data security always starts at the gate, making sure that access to the console is only to those that actually should have access, right? So if any bad actor were to infiltrate your operating system, they would then also have to be leveraged your MFA to get into the console itself. Now, again, once you're in the console, what we're going to do here is we're going to talk through a little bit about the architecture, the components that really make up Veeam. So within Veeam, we have, again, your backup server. So what I'm logged in now, the backup server really is the brains of the operation. What it does, it essentially manages and controls the communication between your source infrastructure, again, VMware, Hyper-V, agent-based systems. You've got Nutanix, RHV. Veeam supports all those different platforms, and the ability to communicate and talk to the source is essentially your backup server. But then the backup server, being the traffic hub, needs to have some type of data mover, something that essentially does all the heavy lifting, does the reading, the writing, and the transport of all that data. So that's what we call our backup proxies. Right. And with backup proxies, again, you have backup proxies to do what we call data move for essentially your VMware workloads, your Hyper-V workloads, and specifically for your NAS workloads, right? We also have things for replication, such as continuous data protection, which is 2 to 15-second RPOs. So all these have a data movers associated to it to send the data from your source over to your target location. Now, also from a Veeam perspective, where the backup server currently is a Windows-based system. Notice here I'm logged on to my Windows server for the backup server. The proxies can be Linux. So if you wanted to leverage a Linux proxy server to do your data moving, absolutely do that. Again, that can save some money on license costs and so on and so forth. Adding a proxy is relatively straightforward. You just right-click, add proxy, essentially pick whatever proxy you want to go ahead and create, and then at that point, Veeam will walk you through the process of creating that proxy. Very straightforward, very, very intuitive from the perspective of leveraging our proxies. Notice here that, again, we can add multiple proxies. So again, Veeam you can scale out. So as your infrastructure grows, Veeam can grow with you, right? Starting with maybe you might have 20 VMs or 20 servers you're protecting it, and maybe 50 terabytes worth of NAS data, and you grow to 500 terabytes worth of NAS data and 500 servers. Veeam can grow and scale with you based upon the ability for us to scale out. And the nice thing about Veeam is there's no requirement for hardware. Right? Veeam is hardware agnostic. You can run everything as a virtual machine, or you can go ahead and run things as an integration with a physical machine. So it's really up to you to determine what makes the most sense. Right? Now, where the backup proxies is our data mover, we also have our backup repositories. Now, the backup repositories of Veeam, that's where we store data. That's where we put all of the data that we protect. Now, the nice thing is you could have all different types of backup repositories. We support object storage. So object storage being AWS, right? S3 object storage, right? Hot tier, cool tier, cold tier. The same would apply for Azure, right? We support deduplication appliances, right? Whether it be ExaGrids or data domains or HP Store Ones. Veeam supports all those different hardware platforms. Direct attached storage, right? If you don't want to have object storage and you don't want to have a deduplication appliance, you have cheap and deep servers, right? A JBOD with tons and tons of storage. Well, absolutely, Veeam can support that also. Maybe NAS shares, NetApp or Cumulo or any of those solutions where you're using an NFS or SMB share. You again can write to each and every one of those different locations. This is again one of the pillars of Veeam is called data freedom. You have the ability to put your data wherever you want to put it, whether that be in the cloud, whether that be on-prem, whether that be on block-based storage, file-based storage. You have the flexibility to pick and choose what makes the most sense. And notice here that you have the ability to also make your data immutable. So one of the key features in Veeam is the ability to ensure that your data is protected, back to data security, right? Ensuring that when you go ahead and write the data to some target location, that you have the ability to make sure that no one can modify, change, or delete that data. So that way that in this case of a ransomware attack or a case of a disaster event within your organization, you have access to that data. Now, granted, you have here, cloud-based object storage, but that does not prevent you from having on-prem object storage. So Veeam supports the ability to essentially have on-prem object storage where you can also leverage immutability. Again, whether you leverage immutability within the object storage perspective or you leverage immutability from a block-based or disk-based, we support both. Block or direct attach would be our hard Linux repositories. And for object storage, that would just be essentially any of those different object storage providers that are S3 compatible. Now, once you create your repositories, making something immutable inside of Veeam is very straightforward. You right-click, go ahead and show properties here. And to make something immutable, what you would do is within the bucket itself, it is essentially a checkbox. You just check the box. Once you check the box, Veeam will make that data immutable. And once we make that data immutable, again, no one can change, modify, or delete that data. Now, if you notice here, this is for 10 days. Again, this is just for data that gets written into it. But if you have things like a grandfather, father, son, in version 12, we're effectively allowing you to essentially apply your immutability to your GFS retention policy. So you've got weeklies, monthlies, or yearlies. Well, based upon whatever those retention policy is, they would also be made immutable, specifically for storage within Veeam. So again, this is just a lot of mechanisms to ensure that we provide that data security component. Now, within Veeam, prior to version 12, to write to object storage, we had to leverage something called our scaled-out backup repository. Right, when I right-click here, go to my scaled-out backup repository, you essentially have what we call performance tier. Performance tier really is your on-prem storage, where you store the data, where you write the data first on-prem, but then we also have capacity tier. This is where we extend that out. But the problem with this is that you're always writing data first to block-based or disk-based targets before you can actually tier that out into object storage. Now, with version 12, one of the enhancements we made is the ability to essentially point your backups directly to any of the object storage providers. You no longer need to have that on-prem block-based device to tier your data onto first before you tier it to cloud. Veeam now allows you to essentially write your data directly to object storage. And again, to do that, you would have your backup job. Within your backup job, you can right-click. Let me edit my backup job real quick here. And in the past, where I had to point my storage location to a scale-out repository, which is one of these guys here, now I have the ability to point directly to an object storage. Again, whether that be an on-prem object storage or even a cloud-based object storage, such as either Amazon or Wasabi or any of the S3 compatible object storage. Veeam now has the capability to provide you that ability to write directly to that location. Now, this is great for also you have remote offices, right? You have a remote office that doesn't have the storage capacity to back everything in local first. Having the ability to write directly to object storage allows you to skip that step, allows you to go directly to there, and allows you to have access to that data in case of any type of failures within that location. Because from a recovery perspective, again, one of the pillars of Veeam is data recovery. The components of object storage allows us to do all the great recovery functionality that we would expect from Veeam, right? Things like instant recovery, things like instant disk recovery. You could have guest file recovery. You could have application-based recovery for like Active Directory, SharePoint, Exchange, all these different pieces. And we just recently added Postgres also in version 12. So if using Postgres databases, we have to go to application level recovery of those specific Postgres databases for you. Now, one thing about Postgres databases, not only did we apply or create the ability for you to protect your Postgres databases, one thing that we also did in version 12 is the ability to essentially leverage Postgres as a configuration database. So prior to version 12, we only leveraged SQL. It was when we deployed the backup replication, we would leverage a SQL Express if you didn't have a full version of SQL. The problem with SQL Express is that you would only have, again, one processor. You would only have 2 gigs of RAM that you can leverage, and effectively the database size was only 10 gigs. Made for a very difficult situation when you have a very large environment, because now organizations would then be required to effectively buy SQL Server licenses. With version 12, we're including Postgres within the deployment to allow you to leverage Postgres as a database platform. One thing to keep in mind, if you are upgrading to version 12 from version 11, then what needs to happen is that you'd first have to upgrade your upgrade to version 12, upgrade your SQL instance, all that component, allow Veeam to do the upgrade. And then once you've upgraded to version 12, then at that point, there is a migration process where you can then leverage Postgres. You just deploy Postgres server either on the database server, some other location. You will then point to it when you do the migration, and then at that point, it will then create the tables and then allow you to use Postgres going forward. Again, that's another functionality or feature that we added into the solution with version 12. Now, going back to, again, the backups themselves and what type of backups can we create. Keep in mind that Veeam essentially can create not only your backups of your virtual infrastructure, we can create backups of your physical infrastructure. So if you've got some physical workloads you want to do, we can create what we call protection groups. And within these protection groups, one thing that we've added in version 12 is something called cloud machines. So not only can we essentially connect to your individual computers on-prem, objects that live in Active Directory, you can import it via CSV, or you can even pre-install our backup agents to things like, again, Solaris or things, any of those types of servers. We can actually pre-deploy the agents to. We can also connect to Amazon EC2 instances, Azure and Azure VMs. And in doing this, what we're doing here, which is very different and unique, is that notice here it says without requiring direct network connection. So in other words, you don't need a VPN. You don't need to have a direct network connection to your Amazon instances. We will connect to it via API. We will then enumerate that based upon your storage account, and then be able to then at that point protect those cloud-based workloads directly from your Veeam console here. Again, to do that, click on Cloud Machines. I hit Next. I supply with my credentials. I pick the region. I go ahead and select my data center. This one I can go ahead and do, I think it's Ohio East. Maybe it's East. Let's see here. Click Add Object, and then for their machines. And then at that point, you'll see the region. You'll see all the different VMs that live in that location. And at this point, you can go ahead and add these systems into your protection group. Now, once you add those systems protection, you could also create exclusions if there are certain systems that you did not want to protect. And then, of course, you would apply, assign some IAM roles, permissions to it. And then after that, you can then go ahead and schedule the, what we call a scan of that protection group. So why is this important? Because this protection group is essentially just a grouping of all your cloud workloads. So if you add more systems to this protection group, Veeam will automatically deploy our agents to those systems and essentially add that into any jobs that you would then associate this protection group to. So again, this is the ability for Veeam to help automate and streamline the process of managing essentially those systems that we're protecting. No longer do you need to actually go out to any of those specific systems that you want to protect and deploy agents manually. Veeam will do all that for you. Veeam will manage and maintain that whole process to ensure that if you add new systems to your group, that they're all have the necessary components for you to protect it. Right. And again, keep in mind that this is not only for cloud workloads, but we do this for essentially any of those different systems. We will then effectively deploy, update. So if you upgrade your Veeam backup server to a new version, when we rescan that protection group, we will then at that point upgrade those agents for you automatically. That way you don't have to go out and do all that yourself. So again, that is, again, a new feature in version 12. One other thing that you could also do in version 12 is that when Veeam actually has, when we create backup jobs, right? And within the backup jobs, whether it be agent jobs or virtual machine jobs, one thing that we also do is we do what we call application-aware processing. So from a security perspective, when we do application-aware processing, you also have this guest OS credentials, right? These are just credentials that we use to authenticate. One feature that's new in version 12 is the ability to create group managed service accounts. So we can actually add a group managed service account to specifically this to this job. So that way you don't necessarily need to apply it with localized credentials. You use a group managed service account. And then at that point, we will authenticate to that group managed service account to facilitate any of the application aware components. And again, any application aware component is really our ability to protect anything that's virtualized, SQL, Oracle, Postgres, without actually loading any agents onto those virtual machines. Again, this is a virtual system, right? Whether it be Hyper-V or VMware, we will then essentially allow you to do agentless backups of those specific applications. Essentially anything that's VSS aware. right? It could be SQL, Active Directory, it could be a SharePoint, it could be any of those components that are application aware. Veeam will quiesce it, make sure that it's transactionally consistent, and allow you to effectively be able to facilitate recovery of that data set from a transactionally consistent backup. Right? Whether that means it's a database to a certain transaction, or that means an Active Directory object that needs to be recovered. So with that, these are essentially, again, your ability to create backup jobs. We also have the ability to do backup copies. So one thing that Veeam advocates to our customers is that when you have effectively data that you need to protect, you're not protecting it just with a single copy. You need to protect it what we call the 3-2-1 rule, right? And the 3-2-1 rule is 3 copies of your data, 2 copies of those data needs to be on different media, and 1 copy needs to be off-site. So that's the original 3-2-1 rule. And to do that, Veeam essentially, again, has the ability to create your traditional backups. We also have the ability to create backup copy jobs, right? So where we can go ahead and copy the backups to another location. And again, we also have the ability to tier off the backup. So if you're writing data directly to on-prem storage, again, keep in mind that our scale-out repository allows us to tier that off into cloud-based storage, right? Also, Veeam has the ability to support tape. So if you have the need to back up your data directly to tape, you can do that also. And not only can you write data to object storage or to tape, but you can write data to object storage to tape. You can write NAS data to tape. You have all these different functionality in tape. And from a Veeam perspective, we support tape libraries, different robotics, and again, anything LTO 4 and above. We will, or LTO 3 and above, we will support from a tape perspective. So again, those are all features and functionality that we provide in with Veeam. And the main thing there is the ability to have multiple copies of your data and having it one offsite. Now, if for organizations that, again, don't want to have tape, keep in mind that you do have the ability to leverage cloud-based solutions, right? Whether that be your hyperscalers like Amazon or Azure or Google or even our managed service providers, right? We do have abilities for you to essentially replicate and copy your data offsite. So again, that is the different types of backup jobs, right? Now, once we actually have all these different backup jobs, right, whether it be VMware, again, whether it be your Hyper-V, whether it be agent-based jobs, again, whether it be Linux, Mac, Solaris jobs, you have all these different jobs. Once you create the jobs, then at that point, what's really important and what I think resonates with a lot of our customers is not necessarily just being able to back up. The backup process is very straightforward. Every solution in the marketplace will back up your data. What becomes most important is recovery. How do we recover your data? And then on top of that, how reliable is that recovery process? How sure are you that that data is going to be there for you when you go ahead and try to recover your data? So when we look at recovery, Veeam has, again, multiple ways to recover. Veeam, again, pioneered the ability to do what we call instant VM recovery. So for any server that you back up, whether it be virtual, whether it be physical, right, where it be like a Windows box here, Veeam has the ability to essentially instant recover that data. And so when we talk about instant recover, that's the ability for Veeam to essentially take any workload, physical or virtual, spin it up in your Hyper-V or VMware environment, and essentially spin it up within a span of about 3 minutes. So let me do that really quickly here. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of our servers here. Let's go ahead and do, this is SQL server here. Right click on that, instant recovery to VMware. And what Veeam's going to do here is Veeam's going to allow me to essentially pick a point in time. I can do original location, new location, hit next here. And then from here, I can go ahead and give it a new name. Pick a host. Again, we will need resources from a hardware, from a CPU memory perspective, but then all the storage that's going to be leveraged is going to be from the backup target directly. Now, what I'm doing here, this is from, again, disk-based target, but I can also do this from object storage. So if I hit next here, I can redirect my temporary snapshot data to a redirected cache. Again, that's just to help performance. I can also do this, which is scan the machine for malware. So when we go ahead and facilitate recovery, keep in mind that with malware being a top point of contention or a subject that all organizations are looking at, you can essentially, before recovery, you can essentially scan that workload for any type of malware that might be associated to it. Once that's done, I can hit next here, give it a reason, hit next again, and then at that point, I can connect to network and power on the machine. I'm going to power it on, not connect it, just because this is a machine that's currently running. So at that point, I will then go ahead and be able to use it. So I hit finish here. What Veeam's going to do is Veeam's going to go ahead and facilitate recovery of this system. Now, this server, However large it is, doesn't matter. Veeam will facilitate the recovery of this system in about 3 minutes. All right, regardless of size. And again, this will be the same for if I decided to do this from disk-based storage, right? Or even object storage. We don't lose any functionality when it comes to this. Veeam pioneered this technology way back in, I would say 2010 is when we actually pioneered and patented this technology. And this is it again. This allows our customers to be able to recover their data quickly and efficiently, and allow their users to connect into this machine if necessary, if the primary server is down. So you notice here what Veeam is doing. Veeam is essentially locking the backup file. Veeam is publishing the backup file directly to your virtual environment. Then at that point, it's updating configuration, checking for free space on my data storage in VMware. And then now it is registering this virtual machine directly to my virtual environment. Right. And this whole process here so far has taken all of about 1 minute to do. And so what I'm doing here is while this runs, right, I will go ahead and do this. I'll let that run for a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and go to my vSphere environment. What we'll do here is go ahead and just refresh a little bit. What you're going to see here is when I go ahead and refresh, you should see at some point the test server get created in this environment here, right? So go to prod, take this to prod. Pull this up here, grow this here. And then I put this into this host. I'm going to put it here. And again, I put it into the location. Then at that point, it will show up in my environment, my prod environment here. Refresh. Here you go. So in my prod environment, I went ahead and recovered my demo SQL Server directly to my prod environment. And here, notice that it is up. I can go ahead and launch the web console if I wanted to see what's going on this machine. And again, it's still booting up. But effectively, this machine is being powered on. Now, the nice thing here is once it's powered on, it's fully functional. I can essentially right-click on this and migrate this to production if I wanted to. I can, if I just want to test it and not necessarily do anything more with it, I can stop publishing. So again, this technology allows me to essentially interact with this virtual machine relatively quickly without having to wait for full recovery or restore operation to occur. Now, on top of that, not only can I do this for VMs, but I can also do this for other things. So if I go to my object storage here, I can go ahead and do this from object storage. I can do this from here. I can essentially do the same instant recovery if I wanted to do a database. So if I can go here, I can do application items. Veeam has the ability to essentially do this at the database level. So here I can go ahead and give it a reason. Again, browse. I've selected application items and SQL Server. So what Veeam's going to do here is Veeam's going to connect to those databases local to this backup. And I can go ahead and right-click on any one of these databases and also do an instant recovery. What this does here is this will allow Veeam to pick and choose whatever SQL Server you have in your environment, mount the database directly to it, and then in the background, start doing a migration. So this will allow Veeam to essentially move the data in the background while you're essentially using it, and then allow you to essentially facilitate recovery for your end users. Okay. Again, we have the ability to do instant recovery, so that way we move the data in the background. We also have the ability to do a publish. So the publish again is it just allows you to take the any database and just publish it without actually moving it. Again, just another feature and functionality within the solution to allow you to have more access to it. Now, what's really nice here is that you do have the ability to do this for not only just those two, but then you can restore the database, you can restore the schema, you also have the export capability. So again, all these features and functionality are again built into the platform for you. All right. So aside from just doing that, again, Veeam has the ability to do that for Active Directory objects, SharePoint objects. And again, if you do Postgres, so we have the ability to leverage that for Postgres servers. Now, once you have your backups created and once you've got these backups written in these different locations, one thing that happens a lot with our end users is prior to version 12, if you ran out of storage in some target location, right, for you to move the data set, you had to essentially, select, go to either your file system, you have to copy paste, do a lot of, there's a lot of gymnastics or hurdles you have to overcome to move a backup one location to another. Well, nice thing about Veeam version 12 is that now I can right click on any of these backups that I've created and also have the ability now to move backup. And when I move backup now, I can essentially pick and choose any other job I want to go ahead and move it to. And in doing so, it will then allow me to move the backups to that other repository location. Now, nice thing about leveraging this solution versus manually doing it in the file system is that when you leverage this in version 12, Veeam actually maintains the XFS and REFS pointers, the links, because Veeam leverages something called block cloning. And I would think of block cloning as the ability for Veeam to mitigate write operations on disk when that block already exists. So Veeam will essentially leverage either REFS and XFS to facilitate this process, and then allows us to essentially reduce or mitigate the storage consumption on your storage location. Again, REFS and XFS are specific to direct attached storage. So any type of direct attached storage to either a Windows box for REFS and XFS for Linux. And especially for Linux, from an XFS perspective, we would also then at that point, I was also leveraging immutability on the hardened Linux repositories to make sure that no one is modifying or deleting any types of data on that specific repository also. So again, you can do a move operation here. We also have the ability to do a copy operation. So if I right click here, I can also do a copy operation. So again, this functionality, what I'm showing right now, the ability to move your backups from different jobs, moving it to different locations. Again, this is something specific to version 12. Now, also something really cool about version 12 is that prior to version 12, we always had to write our backups to a block-based target device on-prem, right? So for NAS devices or NAS backups, we always had to point it somewhere. But in version 12, with the advent of direct-to-object, now if you didn't want to back up your NAS data and put it onto on-prem disk, you could essentially, again, at that point, write that directly to object storage also. This is great for, again, the remote offices that have a lot of like user data, share data that you don't have storage or locations there to store the data. You can go ahead and leverage, again, Veeam's version 12 feature to go direct to object storage for all your NAS data. And again, with that, you also have the ability to provide immutability for any of that data that gets protected. So again, that's disk-based, again, object storage-based. Those are all the different ways that we can, again, facilitate recovery. One thing that Veeam always tells customers is that what I'm showing you here, again, is really to recover, granular applications, files, full VMs, physical servers, right? You have NAS-based workloads that we can recover. And again, from a NAS-based workload that we can recover, much like how we saw that one, you right-click and notice here, you have instant file share recovery. So when I click on Instant File Share Recovery, what this does is, irregardless of size of your NAS workload, I can go ahead and pick a mount location. And this mount location will essentially publish this share to this mount location. From there, it will then allow me to set permissions to this specific share to then allow certain specific users access into this data set. Right. What I'm doing here, this is again direct from object storage. So I'm essentially enumerating all this data from my object storage location sitting in essentially right now my object storage location on-prem. Here I go ahead and set my account owner. I can set permissions. And the nice thing about setting permissions is this is who do you want access to this share? Again, we're creating an instant file share. So once I hit next here, it will go ahead and give me a reason. We'll go call this test. Hit next. And again, much like how I showed you for the instant VM recovery, when we do the NAS-based recovery, it's going to take, again, approximately 3-ish minutes to facilitate the recovery process, right? And what that does is that we will take the share data, mount the share data to that to mount location, and then from there create a file share location directly from that server. So within here, actually, this was 1 second, actually. I can now click on Open File Share, and then from here, I have now access to my whole file share. Keep in mind that if from a permissions perspective, whoever you allow access, when you granted permissions, that's how they will get access to the share. That's how we enable access permissions. But the permissions within the share, so the individual permissions in the share is still is still there. So if users don't have access to certain things, they go properties here, they will basically only see, their specific permissions that are associated at that point. At the top level share location, that's where we go ahead and provide access. So if you want to say, hey, I want only this specific group of individuals to have access to it, you can at that point, when you do the presenting of the share, you can do it right then and there. Again, much more efficient, much quicker. And what's really nice here is that in a situation where you had, some type of disaster event where your entire share is down, when you do this instant mount, in the background, you can go ahead and allow Veeam to facilitate the data movement to that location, So if I go ahead and go to my instant recovery, if I go to my share, I can go ahead and migrate to production. And what this does here is this will allow me to send it back to the original location. So if there were, the server lost its data for whatever reason, and now you have to recover the data, we can go ahead and go to the original location. We can go to a new location, right? But if I do the new location, for instance, if I hit next, I have restore options, right? And what restore options is, it says, I'm not going to restore the entire thing, right? I just want to replace older files only, or restore everything if I wanted to. So I can go ahead and do something here to mitigate the amount of recoveries I need to do based upon what needs to get restored back into that location. And then we also have a functionality called switchover. So as this data is being moved in the background, Veeam will then allow you to say, hey, once all the data has been migrated over or recovered to that location, do you want Veeam to automatically switch it over to that share? Or do you want to go ahead and manually switch it over, or you can schedule that switch over to do whatever you want? Again, this process here just allows for that quick, efficient recovery of your data, as we're trying to provide you that recovery scenario. So again, that is the NAS-based workloads. So that's the NAS-based shares. And really nice thing there is that you can write this directly to object storage. You didn't have this capability prior to version 12. One other feature that we added in version 12 is that, irregardless of the fact that we have the ability inside of Veeam to back up via agents, right? Your Windows SQL Server using application web processing, or using VMware as an agentless component to do SQL Server, right? We always had also the ability in previous versions to do Oracle integration with RMAN. So the nice thing about version 12 is that with version 12, we're actually enabling a plugin that allows us to essentially connect directly to your management studio, and then allows the DBAs to essentially create backup jobs, leveraging this plugin. So this plugin will be deployed directly to your database server. And then from here, instead of using VSS to quiesce and back up your databases, Veeam can now integrate directly with Management Studio using native SQL commands to essentially back up whatever databases you want at this point. With the agentless or agent-based models, we're backing up the entire image. And then in backing up the entire image, we back up effectively all the things or components underneath it. But with this integration directly with SQL, now we could go ahead and back up individual databases, only certain databases that we want to go ahead and protect. And when we back up these databases, you can go ahead and do just, you can do it a full backup, differential backup, you do a log-based backup. Again, it's based upon whatever your specific requirements are. Call this test. I'll hit next here. Your backup options, you can apply retention policy to it. So based upon whatever retention policy you have, you can apply retention policy, and again, the action log associated to it. And what's nice is not only can you facilitate the backup of all your SQL components, right, but also you can facilitate restores, right? So here, you also have the ability to restore that data directly back to either to original location or to new location. Veeam will essentially enumerate the instance, the database, the server you want, and then at that point, you select the database, and then you select the backup content. You at that point hit next. You can pick the restore point you want to go ahead and do, the target location you want to recover it to. And again, if you want to put the recovery state in recovery, that means you bring it online. No recovery means to keep it offline, and so on and so forth. So you do have this built into the technology with version 12, having what we call the SQL plugin component. So again, it's just a lot of functionality and features of version 12. Now, what I didn't really get into too much is how many features. So version 12 effectively had, from my last, for what they told me last, was 500 new features and functionality. Yeah. So based upon the 500 features and functionality, right, that's a lot of different things that we added in version 12. Right, aside from just the what I like to call the highlights that we're showing you today, right? So keep in mind that, again, this is for your SQL components. Veeam's had the ability to do Oracle RMAN integration. So we've always had those pieces in place, right? And what's really nice is if you do create your jobs, your backup jobs from that plugin, they will actually show up in the console here also. So that way you can actually see, any of those jobs being ran, and you can actually audit and monitor any of those jobs to be successful or not directly from this console. So you do have that ability directly through Veeam here to accommodate that. So actually, I'm just checking to see if there's any type of questions there or anything like that. Perfect. Nothing out there. Again, please keep on that. If you want to throw questions on there, let us know. And again, any questions you may have, I want to make sure that we address. So feel free to throw those into your question screen. So much like how we do the instant recovery from a VMware perspective, once you are done with this share, you can go ahead and stop publishing, and then at that point, Veeam will then dismount that share and then essentially clean itself up. All right. So again, we have the ability to do your backup jobs. Other thing is that once you've got all the backups created, once you've got all those pieces in place, one other thing we tell customers is reliability. How certain are we that our backups will be there and available to us? So we talked earlier about the 3-2-1 rule, right? 3 copies of your data, 2 copies on different types of media, and then 1 copy off-site. You've also added 1 0. So you have the 1 and the 0 at the end of that, right? The 1 is you need 1 copy that is immutable or air-gapped, and then 0 means 0 errors or 0 excuses why things didn't work, right? And to do that, Veeam has something called Sure Backup. So Sure Backup allows us to essentially connect our backup jobs to what we call a virtual lab component. And this virtual lab component effectively will allow us to spin up any virtual machine that we've backed up and test to ensure that the system itself is functional. Because every system in the marketplace today, or every backup solution, is going to do a CRC check on the backup file. One thing that Veeam provides is the ability to essentially test the virtual machine itself, and we spin it up, we start it up, and then we also make sure that you can interact with it, whether it's a SQL server, whether it's an Active Directory server. We check all those pieces to make sure that the functionality is in place. That way you can be certain that during a disaster event that you needed to restore a virtual machine, you can effectively do that directly from your Veeam environment. Again, reliability is key. We did you're going to notice here, one of the components that you just recently released is our data trends report, right? Data protection trends report. And what that does is just tells us, what's happening in the industry today, right? What's the most concerning thing that organizations are seeing? And what's most concerning is reliability. How reliable are their backups? How certain are they that they can get their data back? So with Veeam, one thing we want to tell our customers is that if you effectively leverage the Sure Backup solution, you should not have any situation where you are unsure that it's not going to work. This will allow you to essentially sleep better at night, because Veeam is going to run the backup. When the backup runs, automatically test the backup with the Sure Backup process, and then send you a report in the morning to ensure that you understand what worked and what didn't work specifically for those systems. Again, it could be one system, it could be multiple systems within your applications group here and your virtual lab environment. From that, right, you also have the ability to do replication, right? Veeam is not only your traditional backup solution, right? It's a replication engine also. And the replication engine, again, leverages both what we call the vSphere API for input output. So leverages that, allows us to do what we call continuous data protection. So we can create a CDP policy, and that CDP policy will allow us to do 2 to 15-second recovery points, right? Or you can do standard replication, which means that Veeam will create a snapshot, replicate the data, and then commit the snapshot. Really based upon whatever your recovery point and recovery time objectives are, Veeam will allow you to essentially accommodate those. And the nice thing about this is all built in. If you're using Veeam to back up your systems today, you have the ability to replicate the systems also. Whether or not you use it, it's up to you, but you do have that capability. On top of that, you also have the ability to do Sure Backup. Again, it's built into the technology. So these are all components that you have available, so you can go ahead and leverage and use. So we talked about a lot of different things there. What I want to do here is I want to make sure that I allow some time to do some questions, right? I want to give some time to the audience. I know that we didn't put any questions directly on the chat, but I want to make sure that if there are questions, let's go ahead and address those, with the next, I think 15 minutes or 14 minutes that we have.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, we actually do have a lot of questions in. So
we do.
Okay. Yeah. No, this is great. Yeah, and did you want to share anything else on the screen, or do you want to go to the resource slide?
Let's just go to the
audience questions.
Yeah, let's go to the resource slide and then we'll go to the audience questions. Yeah, I do want to make sure we address those. And if I do need to share, we can go ahead and share back and walk through anything specifically for those because I did see those.
Yep. Yeah. No. Excellent. Yeah. And so this is hot off the press. This is great. Basically 2 days old. I just wanted to ask quickly. If you had to boil it down for version 12, what would you say like the headline enhancements are?
Yeah, the biggest enhancement, like I'd say, is again, we have the direct object storage, right? Direct object storage is a key feature allowing our customers to mitigate the requirement of any type of on-prem hardware components. You can essentially go directly to Amazon, you go directly to S3, and essentially, for 90% of the systems that don't need that on-prem presence, you can do directly to their cloud. And then from there, not only cloud, but if you wanted the easy button, some solution where you don't have to manage an operating system, manage like a Linux, a box or something along those lines for immutability. The direct to object really accommodates a lot of that for you, right? So that's one feature. Another feature, again, is Postgres database, right? The Postgres database, which we talked about earlier, the Postgres database just allows our customers to remove the requirement of a SQL server. Right. SQL Server is not cheap, right? It's expensive. So you have to go ahead and procure normally licenses if you have a pretty large environment, right? Anything over, I would say 500 VMs, should leverage a standard version of SQL. With version 12, we can go to mitigate that and essentially use our Postgres database for the configuration of the Veeam components, right? Veeam Mover, another really good feature. Veeam Mover is the ability for us to essentially allow our customers to move backups from one job to another, to move it to different repositories. The ability to essentially say, hey, you know what? I want to rebalance out all of my different repositories because one repository is essentially full and all my other repositories, so again, our scale out solution is not being leveraged at all. So again, those are all different pieces that are really nice. SQL plugin, right? The SQL plugin I talked about earlier. SQL plugin is great because a lot of our DBAs don't want to give up control. That DBAs really want, that's their component. That's what they manage to maintain. They have maintenance plans that they do for their data protection with their databases. Having the SQL plugin now allows not only the DBA the ability to protect the data, right, but allows the backup administrator to have visibility into what's being protected, right? So now they can go ahead and say, hey, it's meeting our specific recovery requirements within the organization, right? And not necessarily just depending on, hey, let's create a BAK file that we throw on disk that someone then has to manage and maintain and ensure that it's there. Right now with Veeam, and you're leveraging Veeam as a solution, you can go ahead and write the data directly into whatever storage location, and then then at that point allow you to facilitate recovery both at your database side, but then also give that visibility to the backup administrator, right? So yeah, those are all really great products. Really good features. Again, I think MFA, right? We talked about a little bit earlier. Data security, essentially making sure that when users are logging into that console, that user actually has access to log into that console. You would think that hey, why? But in this day and age with ransomware, with all the different things that are happening, you want to basically secure as much as you can, right? Not only at the operating system level, but also at the console level.
Yeah.
So those are the highlights I think are really great.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's hard to pick them. From like you said, 500 plus new features and functionality. One of those that you mentioned was Veeam Mover. We have a question from Michael. When moving backups from REFS to XFS, does the Veeam Mover need to rehydrate?
No, that's the beautiful thing about the Veeam Mover. So even if you're going between the different components, we maintain the metadata. So that's what's really powerful with this solution is just the ability to essentially move you across with those components.
Okay, super. We had a lot of questions on the SQL Server side. And you mentioned that one of the best new features was the Postgres database. Are there differences in support between version 11 and version 12? Can people stick on SQL Server if they have it? A lot of questions like that.
Absolutely. So if you have the requirement, there is no requirement to move to Postgres. Postgres is really just a component that we've added as a feature, mainly because some of our customers did not want to go and procure SQL Server licenses. So having the ability to do that, but there is absolutely no requirement to migrate to a Postgres database. If you're on SQL Server today, stay on it. SQL Server is perfectly fine. It's been tuned, it's been scaled. We've worked with it, and we've worked with it for many years since the first iteration of the product.
Yeah, great. We had a question from Hans, who's wondering, can you use a snapshot on a storage device like Nimble that replicates to another Nimble at another site to mount that data and use it?
Absolutely. So one of the nice features of version 12 is the ability to leverage. I think we have what's the peer persistence within HPE. So the ability to essentially replicate the data from one data center to another. Once you replicate the data from one data center to another, Veeam can enumerate those snapshots at the secondary data center and then facilitate recovery of that. Actually, that even lends itself into the next conversation, is that keep in mind that Veeam has something called Recovery Orchestrator also. And Recovery Orchestrator can also leverage the storage snapshots, where we talked about the sure backup job, being able to orchestrate a couple VMs. Orchestrator will orchestrate multiple sets of VMs, a lot of servers, and put logic behind it to ensure that not only is the VM functional, but the application associated with that VM is functional.
Okay. All right, great. Next question comes from Kevin, who's asking for remote site backup or restore directly to or from object storage. Do you need a local VBR server or just a backup proxy service, and then use the local internet service of the remote site?
Yeah, just a local, it would be a gateway component and a proxy component, right? Because you need to essentially back up the data. So the proxy would be the data mover, right? But then once the data mover writes to object storage, right, then at that point, the recovery process could just be localized. There is no requirement to have a backup server at any of those remote sites. You just need a data mover there and you'll be good.
Okay. All right, great. Henry is wondering, is there any ability to link Veeam in the logging to be fed into other apps, something like Splunk?
So that is actually a feature that is, I don't know if I can talk about it, but that is definitely a roadmap feature that is scheduled for hopefully sometime at the end of this year. Again, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but I just did. But yeah, there's some integration to different components. Yeah, but even today, you could, Splunk reads log files, so you could effectively point it to the log locations from a Veeam perspective. But yeah, there will be some more integrations to that, to those different solutions in the future.
Okay. All right, great. We had a question here from Kamisha also about Nimble. She's wondering if the recovery orchestrator supports HPE Nimble.
Yeah, it supports Nimble, HPE, and I think NetApp are the two. So, but yeah, I think those are the components.
Okay.
There are other things we support from a storage integration perspective. For the orchestrator, I think just HPE and then I think NetApp right now. I think maybe one more, but there's a list of them online.
Okay. There were some questions about the immutability feature. And Steve was wondering, can any repository be made immutable?
So not any repository. So the requirement for immutability is either one, it has to be a hardened Linux repository, which means that it has to use XFS, it has to use a Linux version, and from that, it would be a hardened repository for an on-prem storage. A object storage location, such as any S3 compatible object storage, would also be made immutable. So that what we do is we use object locking to facilitate that process, right? But again, it has to either be block-based for using hardened Linux or object storage. And for object storage, there's many different ones, right? You could use there's a technology called object first. You could use Cloudian. There's a bunch out there that will do on-prem hardware. And keep in mind that you have the ability to get leverage to hyperscalers too, Azure, AWS, and also if you have looking for just storage, then like Wasabi, which is just cloud-based object storage.
Okay, all right, super. Manzar here has a great question, which based on your view across customers, and you hear what customers are doing. He's wondering if you have recommendations for cloud storage based on price point and efficiency.
So that's a hard one. because again, we are agnostic, right? We don't really advocate for any one versus the other. The only thing that I can say is that every hyperscaler in the marketplace has different types of costs associated to it, right? You have Azure, AWS, you have Google, and of course you have your storage costs, you have your egress costs, you have your API costs, right? Those are all costs associated to writing data and object storage. Then you have our managed service providers. They are a flat fee, right? Managed service providers, you could go ahead and use Via's cloud service providers and write data to any one of those. Again, that's more of a storage cost, right? There's no fee that they're just partners with Veeam. And then you have uh, object storage providers like Wasabi, where they only do object storage, right? Whereas Amazon, Azure, Google will do things like infrastructure as a service, software as a service. You have platform as a service. You have all these different offerings that you can leverage. Whereas like a Wasabi would only have storage, and something like them would not charge you anything more than a flat fee. So again, there's different ones out there. A lot of it would really depend on whatever the requirements are. Veeam, from the perspective of how we leverage it, we look at the internet pipe. How fast is the pipe, and how fast can we write data to that location, right? Based upon that, we can write it there. We do multi-streaming. We have different connections that we create to make it as efficient as possible. But again, a lot of what from a cost and price perspective, that again, that's going to really dictate on whatever the requirements of the organization.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, I wish we had another hour. We've got so many questions in the queue here. We'll get all of those over to your team so you guys can get back to people after the event. But I did just want to take a minute here just to there was one audience question. I apologize. I forget who sent it in, but just asking is there are there resources available as far as like how to step by step go from version 11 to version 12 or from previous versions on, is there anything you can recommend there? And then maybe that's a good segue into some of the Veeam resources that we've got up on the screen here.
Yes, there absolutely is. So from an upgrade perspective, there is actually a checklist that we've actually provided online. What we could do is after this call, we can actually provide that to the group. But there is essentially a upgrade community center.
Okay.
It's effectively, it has all the different links for all the different different platforms that you would have to upgrade, whether it be Hyper-V, VMware, whatever the case be. There is a community component. If you do just type in Google or wherever it is, type V12 upgrade center, it will essentially take you to the upgrade center, and it actually has a checklist of all the different ones for you. The biggest thing I like to tell customers, just from a high level, is when you're upgrading to version 12, you should be at either version 10 or 11, right, to be able to do this. And when you do this, you need to make sure that you upgrade again. If you have Enterprise Manager, which is our web-based interface, upgrade that first, and then from there you would upgrade your vBackup replication server. And then if you're looking at migrating to Postgres, once you upgrade those two pieces, then at that point you can run the migration tool or migration component to essentially recover the database to a Postgres, and then essentially migrate it over.
Okay. All right. Super. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on, giving us this tour, and answering all the questions. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. This is just being able to have this many people online leveraging and looking at the technology. Phenomenal. Thank you so much for having me. And again, appreciate everyone's time today.
Awesome. All right. Well, Tom, have a great day. And we're going to move on here to the prize drawing. So our winner today of the $300 Amazon gift card is Matthew Stearman from Colorado. So congratulations to Matthew. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for all of your great questions today. That concludes this event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.